we're having a webinar with PNSQC. Our webinar title is Learning to Be More User-Centered. So first, let's welcome Eileen. Eileen, nice to have you here.
Thanks, Phil. Great to be here. I'm really looking forward to the conference.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to your webinar today on user-centeredness. I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. But first, let me talk a little bit about the organization. PNSQC has been around for quite some time. As you can see, I'm not going to read through the slides, but the reason we're having the webinar is that we're having a conference coming up, so we want to, of course, let folks know about the conference. But also, more importantly, is that you are going to be giving a workshop for us, and we wanted to give our audience kind of a taste of some of the stuff that you're going to be talking about in your workshop. What's the title of your workshop, Eileen?
The title of the workshop is the same as the webinar title, Learning to Be More User-Centered. Yep.
Okay, great. Let me first talk a little bit about Eileen. Eileen has a great background in process work and has worked with CMMI for quite a long time, and has recently gone off and broke off and done her own, working in her own business now, working on process improvement with nonprofits as well as other companies. And what I'm really excited about today is that you're going to be covering some examples that are quite out of the ordinary of what we usually hear about. So we're really glad to have you on. And I'll let you take it away. Basically, I will kind of represent the audience, and so when the audience asks questions, I will kind of raise my hand, I guess you could say, and ask on their behalf. So I'll let you talk, Eileen, but be aware that I'll be jumping in there and trying to interject as well.
Absolutely.
So I'll let you go ahead.
Thanks a lot, Phil. I encourage you to jump in as much as you like, and let's have this be as much of a conversation and dialogue as we can. So,
okay, great.
Why the heck user-centeredness? Why am I raising this topic anyway? User-centeredness is something that's been getting attention in a lot of disciplines for some years. And certainly it's familiar to software designers. It's been going all the way back to the late 70s. Herb Simon at Carnegie Mellon introduced some of those ideas. So I think software people in the PNSQC audience will be familiar. What's happened for me is I've seen opportunities to make training a lot more learner-centered as well. And I've seen places in change management programs and elsewhere where if you get something to be more user-centered, you just get better results. So if you're a trainer, if you're a champion for maybe a new software or quality method, it can be really helpful to take this approach. And conceptually it's not hard, but it's a little bit tough in practice to get it to work. So I'm looking
at this picture. I'm sorry, Eileen. I was wondering. I'm looking at this picture here, and I'm wondering why you chose this picture, this graphic.
I was really looking for something that showed a set of professionals engaged around a computer. So partly because that's one of the places as a product manager we go, is trying to make sure that we really understand what users are looking for. It'll be a contrast with images we'll see in just a couple of slides here. So in some ways I wanted to here's the desire that people are engaged, happy, giving their input. Yeah, that's the idea.
I guess this would be opposed to a lecture style type orientation where you've got one guy kind of, I guess you could say the manager or possibly the professor, and you've got students there kind of in a daze.
That's right. So when it comes to training, that's kind of traditionally what we've done, is that somebody who's expert stands up and talks and shows slides. And we're pretty tolerant of that, especially in the software field. but there's a lot of science that shows it's not the most effective way. And one of the books I've relied on when I train other instructors is called Telling Ain't Training. And in some ways, that's a good way to summarize the idea here. If you're talking, learning is not occurring. You have to do some of it, but less of it is better. So.
Yeah, how can we apply this to interacting and working with our users that use our software?
So the same, yeah, absolutely. So I would actually say that the changes in the product management field over the last 8 to 10 years have been in this direction. So I don't know about any of your listeners, but in my last job at the CMMI Institute, I was a product manager, and I had to go off and get the certification. And they spent half the class saying, they have one particular quotation, "Your opinion, while interesting, is not relevant. What you want to do is real." Yeah, how about that? They have it on coffee cups and bumper stickers and try to remind you of it all the time. I think, you know,
that's funny.
If we're expert, we're eager to try to make the right solution for our users and to try to convey what we think will be helpful to them. But a lot of times it's better to let them tell us.
Okay. Well, we certainly have a lot of ways to collect data from users on what they're doing and what they want, more so than we did in the past. So I think these days we just need to get, what to learn to use that data.
I agree. So sometimes when I bring up the idea we were just discussing, Steve Jobs will be mentioned, right? And say, but he didn't ask the users what they wanted. He imagined something even better. I would say, though, he's the great example of user-centeredness because he may not have been able to ask people what you need and ended up with the iPhone and the iPod and any of the Mac products, but he had an intense focus on what users really need, and then he imagined a great solution to it. So it's still possible to bring your expertise to bear, and you may have a better idea for what the solution space looks like than your users, but understanding their needs is the crucial thing.
Okay. Well, this is a really interesting slide here. Wow.
So I put this in here because some 20 years ago, some of the first work I did in the software field was as a technical communicator. And we actually, in the working group I was in, found some data that said a technical communicator is really only useful to you for about 12 to 18 months. The idea is when they're new, they don't understand your technology yet, and they're better able to represent your user point of view then. They don't have the expert blind spot yet. But by the time you've been working with a technical team, and I've experienced this myself, more often than not, I ended up being a member of the team, right? They added me to the team. I was no longer that user advocate. I understood the technology too well, and I began talking about it, writing about it, documenting things as an expert rather than anticipating what the user needs are. So we actually had things we did in that organization to try to mitigate that effect. So we would trade assignments and teams, so forth, to try to stay fresh on the user point of view.
Right. Actually, I've heard I had a conversation about testing the other day, and they were saying that actually the fresh tester is sometimes the best tester, because they come with a new pair of eyes.
Yeah.
But we have a question that came in just a minute ago from Dan. Dan is asking about. He says it sounds like the way that doctors interact with their patients, in terms of having a voice of authority, and wondering, how does the user, pierce this veil of arrogance and authority so that they can be heard? Maybe you can elaborate on that, maybe in a training environment or in other environments also.
Yep. That is a great and familiar example. Thanks for raising that. So I think that's exactly right, and I do think we're seeing a change in the medical field, though. I know that I seem to choose doctors and dentists and other medical professionals who will give me as much information as they think I can handle, and I'm an analytical person and I ask questions. So once they see that, at least the ones I'm working with, they'll say, okay, here are the treatment options for this issue, and here are the ups and downs of each of those choices, and I really participate in the decision making. Now, in part, that may happen because I've selected people who have that tendency anyway, but I have medical people in my family, and I think an interest in working that way has increased. When it comes to the question about piercing that veil, if you're on the user side, I would say assert yourself. You know, I just don't accept sometimes that somebody knows best for me. And I kind of think that is at the crux of this idea. You mentioned authority. I notice this a lot in organizations. I think there's been a gradual shift, certainly in the technology field, away from traditional organizational structures and authoritative roles. I don't think we're done with that yet, and I actually think some of the techniques like Agile, Lean, Kanban, one of the things that's threatening to traditional structure is it's not about the authority somebody has in a particular position. It's about expertise. So that's how I think about it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could consider Agile and Kanban, you know, user-centered development in some ways.
Yes, I think that's right. If you think of the developer as the user in the system or software development task, or the user in the project, think of it that way, right? Whatever it is you're developing.
Right.
Yeah. They should get more choice. And I think the message in a lot
is quite interesting.
So Phil, have you ever been in a class where you feel this way?
Many classes, and actually I learned when I was in college, you see, well, the guy in the front is actually sleeping too, but in college, unfortunately, I didn't learn towards the very end. My last couple of years was that if I sat in the front and got plenty of sleep the night before, and I really asked questions, and probably the most important part is asking questions for the professor, I learned a lot more, and I didn't actually have to study for the exam. I learned it right there in class. So,
yeah, beautiful.
So these guys didn't actually learn that, I guess.
Yeah.
Especially the guy in the blue shirt.
Yep. So that's one of the principles of learner-centered training, right? You were taking responsibility for your own learning. So you were engaging and not just passively receiving whatever was being lectured. But I think a lot of training today still produces the result you're seeing on this image here. And I can tell you that the way I got started focusing on learner-centered training was because I was the product manager for a new CMMI model. And I was tackling a new audience. It wasn't so much software and systems. It was going to be service and all types of service, not just engineering and IT, but lots of other service types. And I was attending a tutorial by a friend and colleague, someone who's spoken a lot at PNSQC, and he had a room full of new potential CMMI users. He was given a session that he calls the crash course on CMMI. And when he got to talking about training, he said, look, if you're going to do anything serious about CMMI, you got to take the intro course. And he said, it's going to be tough. We're going to have to go into a room together for 3 days and open a vein. And I was sitting in the audience as a product manager with a room full of potential users and thought, that is just not acceptable. Not that he said it, that it was too much the case. The prior training, I'm not saying that it didn't have a certain effectiveness and quality, but it was hundreds and hundreds of slides and lecturing, and it often produced these results, not unlike what you see on the picture here. And so I wanted to completely turn it around. I wanted to be as user-centered as possible. And turns out that's called learner-centered or active training. There are a bunch of names for it. And I was just thrilled at the results that we got when we really turned it around. So the traditional course, hundreds and hundreds of slides and mostly lecturing with a few exercises sprinkled in. When I teach the class, I use absolutely no slides, and it's almost all activity. There are other aids to help people remember and capture information and all of that. So that's the general idea.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, when we had talked about this webinar today, you had mentioned that you didn't want to have any slides with any words on them. Is that kind of related to your principles and training?
It is in part. I think that I love the written word. Obviously, I wouldn't have been in a communication field without that. But putting a bunch of words on slides isn't the best way to reach people. And so when I'm given a presentation, I'm always looking for ways to not just be reading slides to people. So I really appreciate having a dialogue with you. I think that that's more engaging for the listeners, I hope. So I have a theory, though, I would like to try out on you and on the audience. This is not science. So a lot of what I've done in this field, I base it on science where I can find it. This is just a hypothesis. I was talking with a colleague who's got a PhD in education, and I was talking with him about this. I said, why are slides so prevalent in software field especially? And he at first said he didn't know. We kept talking about it, and he said, you know what, if you're a software guy, you have to look at a whole lot of abstract verbal stuff, pages and pages and screens of it. That's just the deal. So maybe we're especially tolerant of it in software. So maybe that's part of it. Because anytime I've worked with software people and we get to the point where you say, well, we're going to have to produce some training, the next thing they say is always, okay, I'll start building some slides. And they're usually verbal. Yeah.
Right. So next we're going to do a poll here and talk about, ask our audience on what they think about, the best approach in learning. So I'm going to start off a poll, and we'll see what they have to say. So here we go.
Great.
Well, let's see. Got most of the answers are coming in now. We've got a lot of people saying a variety of learning activities.
Yeah.
Kind of interesting. And then just another 10 seconds here.
Okay.
Okay. Well, it looks like everybody has chosen number 2, which is oops.
Yeah.
Messed up there. Which is a variety of learning activities. But that's not the way it works, though, usually, right, Eileen?
That's right. That's right.
But
variety is one of the, yeah, most of the time. Variety is one of the things I learned looking at the science, how we learn cognitively. It's not just what your preferred approach is, it's that any activity will become tiring if it's used over and over again. And I was pretty fascinated to learn about something that they call the attention clock. So, even people who are really good at concentrating can usually only concentrate for about 40 to 45 minutes. I bristled when I heard about that. I think I can concentrate for hours, but people have measured this over and over again. You're really only concentrating for a time, and most people it's less than that. And there's some evidence that that clock is getting shorter because of all the things we do in parallel and all the demands on our attention. But in any case, even if you're concentrating for 45 minutes, which is the traditional length of a presentation, right? When they check how users or learners are hearing it, the best attention and when they have the most capabilities in the first 10 minutes. That's when they can do the hardest work, do the toughest learning, grasp the concepts. And yet, in the first 10 minutes is usually when we're saying, hey, let's introduce each other. Here's an overview to the topic. We're doing the easier stuff, and we get into the tougher stuff later. So one idea is just to try to flip things around and get tougher content first. But also, the good news is you start that clock, that attention clock, over every time you change activities. So if you're somebody who's going to do some training, give a presentation, do a workshop, talk to people about a change you want them to make, one of the things you can do is just plan some variety of activity. You're more likely to improve learning that way, and you reduce the cognitive load on your users. So that's the idea there.
Yeah. So we have quite a few questions here. I'm going to slow down the presentation, I guess you could say.
Please.
Jess has said that she likes variety, but she likes lots of words as well. So maybe, some people really want to have those words. And I know that when I do trainings, and I don't necessarily call them trainings, I call them, I don't know what I call them, workshops, I guess you could say. I like to have words, but I don't read them. I don't go over them.
Yeah.
They're up there, and I set the expectation and let the audience know, the students know that I'm not going to be following the slides exactly, but I want them to have that kind of as a reference for later. And maybe that's what Jess is talking about. And actually, when you think about it, it goes kind of with agile versus traditional development approaches, where agile were less documentation versus more documentation.
Yeah.
But the documentation we need in agile is for, I guess you could say, for remembering, really, right?
That's exactly right. So it's a remembering aid, or it's a reference. So it's not that I don't use written material. I have tons of it available, but it's not presented as a fire hose and as the main learning activity. So yeah, I am one of those people who actually prefer verbal over visual myself, and so having verbal material is essential. You just want to give people multiple ways to access that, and not rely on lecturing to convey it. One of the really simple things I do when it's a CMMI training, for example, is getting the learners to find information in the reference book themselves and explain it to other people in the class. That works a whole lot better than me spouting off about it to learners.
Well, we have another question/comment from Dan, and Dan says that it seems that one of the persistent problems with training versus education, differentiating those two, is that there are not tests to see if A, the user has retained the information, and B, the lecturer has effectively presented the information so that users retain it. Yeah. Should there be more testing after training to see if it worked? And you said that you had some kind of science that, I guess, some studies that showed some things. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm going to endorse, was that Dan that asked the question?
Yeah, it's Dan, yeah.
Okay, thanks, Dan. So, amen. I'm going to endorse your position, absolutely. There is not enough checking to see whether or not the learning was effective. And if you want the nickel primer on any style of training, it's a matter of setting what your learning objectives are and thinking ahead to how would I check to see if that objective is achieved? How do I know? And then say, what are the activities I'm going to compose here to get those learning objectives accomplished, and then to check them. Now, a test at the end is one way of assessing whether or not objectives were achieved, but one of the things I coach instructors to do is to be constantly checking. So that's what they call formative assessment. While you're in the class, in the training, there are ways you can reinforce learning and check to see what the understanding is, and then you have a chance to adjust your instruction and the activities to try to make sure that objectives are achieved rather than waiting until the end. All right? That's considered best practice, and there are ways to do it. I would say one of the challenges is that it can be pretty tough to get a baseline before the class starts. So I actually asked my team when we were building my first piece of learner-centered training, I said, can't I figure out what people know when they come in, and then we'll have the class, and then we'll have a measurement afterwards that says, what's the delta? What's changed? What do they know now that they didn't know before? And I was fortunate to have one of the authors of one of the books I recommend, Mike Bridges, is a specialist in this area, and he was on my team. The thing that's hard is this is one of the only ways that adult learners are different than children. If you give them a test in advance and say, what do you know about workflow? What do you know about capacity management? Do you know this about risk management and so forth, just to pick some topics in our field? And they don't want to answer that. So it's hard to get an objective view of what did they know to start with, and then check again at the end, and that's what you would really want to know how effective the training is. So you have to try to accomplish it in some other ways.
Right.
Great question.
You mentioned this book here earlier, and then
The user-centered information you need in order to make good design decisions. I'm looking at some others as well, but I like this one. And the concept there is those of us in software and other analytical fields, we tend to be good with concepts and abstractions, but one of the things I've found really crucial is to try to make things tangible first. So I end up telling my instructors, tangible first, abstract later. So give a tangible example, and both the people who need only that and the people who are good with abstractions, you can build up the abstraction later. That's the general idea.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm seeing a lot of parallels, not only in our involved. And we have users contribute. Experience has been big now because it's all about the user.
Something, and then they realize, I'm not sure I got that. I'm not sure I understand it.
Yeah, we have another.
I really like them to take it and move it to the backlog. Great.
Dan's really engaged here. We're getting a good learning experience with Dan. He's asking more questions.
Great.
Dan says, do case studies work better for training purposes? Is there evidence around this? That's an interesting question.
Ah, okay. So off the top of my head, I don't know the
Yeah, so talking about case studies, we got one right here.
kind of, yeah, yeah. So when I've been working in inside organizations for more than 30 years, and I'm a bit of a workaholic, and I just hadn't made much time for volunteering or nonprofit work, but I was interested in having some time to work on poverty issues in Pittsburgh. And I was fortunate a couple of years ago, I went to hear the CEO of Nuru speak. He was a member of the military, and he was serving in Iraq, and he was on patrol, and just one day he says he had an epiphany while he was out there. He said, this is not going to work. This is hopeless unless we attack the root cause of the conditions that he saw around him that led to the conflict and the war. So when he left the military, he went to graduate school, and he wanted to say, what's the evidence for what can work, and how can we tackle this root cause? One of the central things he realized is that you've got to have users of whatever your poverty intervention is. They have to be empowered. They have to really take hold of it. And he goes further than that. He really has them driving the choices that are made. And so instead of coming in and saying, hey, here's the correct way to get water in your village and to start doing agriculture, what they do is they go in and they look for unrecognized leaders, and then they give them some support. They encourage those leaders. They'll teach them some things they might need to know, but they really trust the
This is still the new test case study here. Did you want to finish up this case study, or should we go on to the next one?
No, let's go on to the next one. The point of this image is that they have they are developing a program to say, okay, we think we've recognized some leaders. Here's what we're going to do to help develop them. So,
okay.
So I had learned about Nuru, and I was going to work locally here in Pittsburgh with some colleagues to do something about poverty, and we found this program that's in the U. Fee, where they've got a program, they use a very small amount of money, and in both the cases of Nuru and Fee, they're relying a lot on data and evidence for the choices they're making in the programs. But the participants in the program select what they're going to do. So they might have an education goal, they might want to help start a small business, and all they have to do is come to regular meetings with the fee staff who are just facilitating and helping them gather data. And as long as they provide the data, even if they choose a project that fails, as long as they have made a plan
lay point of view that, oh, it's
Yep.
just too much paperwork and documentation, right?
I'm with you. So on best, when I say best document on this image, that could mean no other documentation than what you've already got. That could mean take a picture of your Kanban board or whatever your workflow board is. Now, sometimes if you are in an organization where, say, you have to go through an appraisal and you're worried about evidence for, proving you do something, especially when it comes to Agile, actually, I find people who are doing Agile effectively often could meet all the evidence requirements for CMMI. That's what I would say. And so it might be that you just need to make some shifts. So if you're
kind of breaking up there,
obstacles in your daily stand-ups, that's an example of risk management. Can you hear me, Phil?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So you might be doing something in Agile that already meets the requirements in CMMI. You just might need to make a shift, and it doesn't necessarily mean writing a big technical document. It might just be take a picture or put other stickies on your workboard about the source of the risk. It might be rather minor. So.
Boy, this slide here goes against what you said earlier. I mean, there's all kinds of words on here, and it's even small.
That is a fair point. Thank you for that. Okay. Hey, I don't expect, I really wanted you to kind of look at it visually, though. So this is a couple of screenshots. It's a couple of screenshots out of a tool that I'm working on. And the idea is to give the user some control. So down that first left column, that's a bunch of names of stuff in CMMI. Doesn't matter what, don't worry about it. It's just that if I'm talking to somebody about CMMI, instead of saying you ought to do all of this content in CMMI, you can ask questions instead and say, are you doing this? If you are, would you want to improve this? Is it relevant even to your work? And then on the right is the result of that voting that the users themselves do. And that tells you, this is meant to tell you what the users think about, here's how much we
In this example, anyways.
Yeah, exactly. I have to say, we just put some numbers in here to produce the particular bubble.
Okay.
So I could deliberately make another point.
So this isn't real. Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
So we've got another poll here to kind of ask the audience in terms of what we've been talking about here. So let me start up the poll and see what they have to say.
Great.
Okay, here we go. Looks like, wow, okay, this is much different than the last poll. So far, we have quite a split.
Interesting.
Just give a few more seconds for people to answer.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, okay, so it's about number 1 and number 3 are about 50-50, and then so 40-40-20. So 40 for number 1, 20 for number 2, and 40 for number 3.
Great.
So what do you think about that? That's kind of interesting.
Yeah. So the fewest people in the middle. Thank you for that. And this was a question I was curious about. I just wanted to know the audience's perception about whether or not their organizations can take this on or not. So the highest number I see in the results, though, is too traditional, hierarchical, or controlling. I guess I would, that doesn't quite surprise me, although I have hopes that in our field in particular, that we can move in the direction. Okay, so that suggests too that organizations and change agents are going to need ways to really help make a difference in their organization if they want to do some of these things. Yeah, okay. Thanks for that input.
Here's more words here. This is a book that building commitment to organizational change. Maybe you can talk about this a little bit. I'm kind of
okay. So, Phil, I noticed that we've got 8 minutes left, and so I can talk about this for a few minutes if you think we've got enough time. I'm not seeing.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not seeing the screen, but that's okay. I know what it looks like. So
okay.
And this might reflect back. Thank you for that. So this applies to individuals and organizations, and so these guys back in the 80s published some material on this, and they said, look, individuals and organizations both commit to changes in their practice in predictable stages. So let's say that out of the people on this webinar audience today, some of you want to try to help your organization shift from being traditional and hierarchical and controlling to being more user-centered. One of the ways to think about it, to conceive of it, is you've got to get the various stakeholders in your organization to get through these steps. And you can't, the idea that Connor and Patterson had is you can't just leap into trial use usually. People have to come in contact with the idea, build up a little awareness, then they're ready for maybe short presentations or a little bit of documentation or background reading on what this idea is about. Then you can get them to try it out. So I have found this technique really powerful in my own technology change management practice, because anytime I'm not getting the result I want, or I have a challenging set of adopters, the way I think about it is, okay, I'm trying to get them to adopt this, and I didn't get them through the prior stages. And I didn't get them to just, first of all, know the acronym for something. What is DevOps, or what is Kanban? And then to understand what would be different about it. Then we can try something out and ask for some adoption. And the reason that's good news if you want to make a change is because it tells you what to try first. And a lot of times those first couple things just take small bits of information. You don't need to overwhelm people with a lot of information. Just a quick discussion describing what problem Kanban can solve, for example, or continuous testing can solve, can start to build up the awareness and understanding you need so that people are more ready for it. So that's the idea there.
Right. I think this applies to, you know, just about anything that you're trying to introduce some kind of technology or some kind of tool or something like that, or a concept even. You know, I gave a talk on pairwise testing a few weeks ago, and you know, I went through this whole cycle here of contact awareness, understanding, talking about tools, and you know, that you're right, they have to get warmed up to it. You can't just say, oh, here's the tool, go try it out, right?
Right. Well said. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so here we go. This is.
Hey, Phil,
here's the case you're making.
That's right. I made this slide especially for you because when we were talking about this webinar, you said, really, it's going to be mostly pictures? How about a little bit of words? So I thought, well, I better make the summary verbal, right?
Right. Well, we have to make Jess happy because she does like words.
Yeah.
Geez, you're breaking up.
Phil, I'm not hearing you.
Again.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm not hearing you.
Okay. All right. So,
Go ahead.
so that's the general takeaway for me. People are more capable than we realize, and when you give them the control, you get more of what you want and what you think will be more effective for them. That's my experience, whether it's training, change management. I think I'm seeing it in poverty programs. I've certainly seen it with CMMI. So that's my encouragement to people to give this a try.
Right. We're just about towards the end of the webinar. Here's Eileen's contact info if you want to contact Eileen. Just as a reminder, we are going to be posting the recording as well as the slides for the webinar. And now we're on to the ending here. Eileen, thanks very much for giving the webinar today. And folks out there that were here on the webinar, don't forget to register for Eileen's workshop, which is entitled the same, about user-centeredness. I think that although a lot of the examples that we had today were about in a learning environment, they can really, in change management, they can really be applied to our daily work life in software development and software testing and so forth. So thanks a lot, Eileen. Oh yeah, and don't forget, guys, sign up for our conference. It's October 12th to the 14th, and we'll see you on October 12th. Thanks a lot, Eileen.
Thanks very much, Phil. Really appreciate it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll talk again. See you in October.
See you then.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.